familiar metallic scent of fear and adrenaline was back, sharp, unwelcome, and instantly recognizable after 2 years of silent, creeping anxiety. It was a smell that belonged to the dead of night, to the cold glow of a phone screen, and to the dreadful, sinking feeling that my carefully constructed world was about to shatter. 6 years. 6 years we'd built this life, brick by shared brick. Laughter, travel, the quiet comfort of knowing someone finally saw your soul. And now, the foundation felt like sand. It all started so innocently, or so I convinced myself at the time. We were only 2 years in, 27, full of that breathless, early 30s optimism, the kind that believes love is enough to conquer all plumbing issues and shared laundry schedules. But the rhythm changed. The intimate, reckless dance we used to share, it slowed, became hesitant, then almost stopped. Our sex life, it didn't just reduce, it evaporated like morning mist, leaving a residue of awkward silence in its place. When I'd ask about it, a casual, "Hey, is everything okay with us?" he'd go instantly defensive. It wasn't a calm, adult conversation defensive. It was a slam door in your face defensive, a sudden wall of icy resentment that made me feel like the one who'd committed the offense. "You're overthinking again," he'd snap, or "I've just been stressed with work. Why do you always make it about us?" It was enough to silence me, enough to make me feel like the needy, unreasonable one. But the gut feeling, the gut feeling, it's a primal, dark whisper that a woman, a person, ignores at their own peril. It clawed at me, night after night, wrapping itself around my chest and squeezing the breath out. "Paranoia," I told myself. "You're a wreck. You're projecting your past failures onto him." But the silence in our bed, the sudden, almost frantic way he'd pull his phone closer when I entered the room, it was too loud. I'm not proud of what I did next. In all my previous relationships, I had a rule: never check a partner's phone. It's the ultimate violation, the admission that the trust is already dead. But my gut wasn't just whispering anymore, it was screaming. One Tuesday morning, he was in the shower, the hot water running loud and steady. The phone was on the bedside table, face up. I picked it up, my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I bypassed the usual places, no damning text messages, no questionable social media DMs. But then I saw it. Multiple logins for WhatsApp. Who, in this day and age, in a country where almost everyone defaults to the main social apps, still needs multiple WhatsApp accounts? It felt instantly deeply wrong. It was a digital fingerprint that didn't fit the scene. When he got out of the shower, towel wrapped low on his hips, hair slicked back, looking annoyingly handsome, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in my lap. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse, my voice was a flat, dead line. "Who are you talking to on WhatsApp?" He froze. That's the only word for it. His body went rigid, the smile he was about to give me evaporated, and his eyes were instantly glazed with panic. "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying for casual, but his voice cracked on the last word. I held up the phone, showing him the screen. "Multiple logins. Why?" He walked over slowly, picked up the phone, and turned away. He fidgeted with the towel, took a deep, shuddering breath, and then delivered the line that made my blood run cold with its sheer, pathetic flimsiness. It's out of boredom." "Boredom?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "You're logging into multiple secret accounts to cure boredom? Are you 12? I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up, but I choked it down. Right then and there, the air in the room thickened into something toxic. I knew. It wasn't just boredom. It was a curtain drawn over something he didn't want me to see. And then, the sudden theatrical shift. He turned around, tears welling up in his eyes. Fast, ready, and utterly devastating. He started to cry, a racking, gasping sob that made his whole frame shake. "I'm scared," he choked out. "I'm so scared our relationship is going to be affected because you don't trust me." It was a brilliant, wicked deflection. The spotlight instantly swung from his suspicious behavior back onto my lack of faith. He wasn't the offender. He was the victim of my paranoia. I felt utterly, horribly gutted. The sight of him, my love, my partner, weeping because I had hurt him with my suspicion was too much for my battered psyche. I crumbled. I thought I was the problem. I internalized the whole thing. I became quite depressed, actually. Quiet, withdrawn, constantly scrutinizing my own behavior. Was I not enough? Was something fundamentally wrong with me that pushed him away, made him seek solace in the sterile void of the internet? He'd look at me with concern, his hand resting gently on my shoulder, asking, "Are you overthinking again, honey? You need to relax." And I believed him. I desperately wanted to believe him. The sheer, intoxicating relief of putting the crisis behind us was enough to fuel the lie. From that day onward, that terrible, pivotal day, our relationship truly soared. We had a great relationship. The memory of the incident faded into a vague shadow of my own insecurity. We made memories, good ones. There was an ocean of respect, shared laughs that made my stomach ache, and I felt utterly, completely loved by him. He became the perfect partner, attentive, affectionate, present. It was a beautiful, convincing performance. We moved forward, accelerated, really. 4 years sped by in a blur of domestic bliss and professional success. We traveled. We planned for the future. We talked about having kids one day. And then, at the beginning of this year, 6 years into our relationship, both of us 31, we started talking about marriage. Real talk. Rings, venues, who to invite, the whole dizzying, wonderful ritual. And that's when it all came flooding back. It wasn't a trickle, it was a dam break. The memory of that morning, the multiple WhatsApp logins, the pathetic excuse, the sudden manipulative tears, it hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was sitting across from him at our favorite brunch spot, sunlight streaming through the window, talking about where we might honeymoon, and I felt physically sick. The gut feeling was back, amplified 100-fold, no longer a whisper, but a deafening roar. My hands were clammy, the world tilting slightly on its axis. The panic was absolute, a cold clarity that cut through 4 years of blissful denial. I knew I had to ask him again. I knew I couldn't walk down an aisle with this black, festering secret buried beneath my trust. I waited until we were home, safe behind the closed doors of our apartment. He was folding laundry, humming some cheerful, irritating pop song. I walked into the bedroom, my voice flat again, emotionless, stripped of all artifice. "We need to talk about 4 years ago." "The WhatsApp." He stopped humming. He dropped the t-shirt he was folding. He didn't look at me, but I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, a familiar sign of deep, internal distress. I didn't give him a chance to spin the story again. "Don't lie to me this time. Don't tell me it was boredom. Don't tell me I'm overthinking. Just tell me the truth." He stood there for a long moment, a statue carved from shame and fear. When he finally looked up, his eyes were full of a genuine, heartbreaking agony. Different from the manipulative tears before, this time, the fear wasn't for himself, I realized, but for us. He admitted it. He admitted to speaking to people online. WhatsApp, various other anonymous apps I didn't even know existed, sexting, photos, emotional intimacy he was sharing with strangers while I was asleep beside him, a whole secret life conducted in the dark corners of the internet. He was adamant, though, that he was never physically cheating, never crossed the line into a real-world encounter. It was always contained in the digital space. I gripped the door frame until my knuckles went white. Physical or digital, the betrayal felt absolute, a dagger plunged into the heart of our commitment. He said it was eating him up, keeping this hidden for so long. He said he was so relieved to finally have it out in the open. But hearing it, hearing the brutal, clinical truth that he had lied, gaslit me, and maintained a parallel, illicit emotional and sexual life for months, I was gutted. Not just hurt, eviscerated. But here's the strangest, most confounding part of this whole impossible story. I forgave him. It didn't happen right away, of course. There were days of shouting, tears, slammed doors, and nights spent sleeping on opposite sides of the apartment. I felt the impulse to run, to burn the whole thing down and start over. But the sheer weight of 6 years, the depth of our connection, the good person I knew he was beneath the fear and the addiction, it held me in place. Since the confession, we've had a big year. We traveled, a kind of forced, frenzied attempt to create new, untainted memories. We went to several weddings, watching other people start their journey. and the irony was a physical ache. I've only told one other person, a close friend who had a similar experience with her now wife, and they've gone on to build a beautiful life with 2 kids. She has been my only support, my one lifeline. Because part of me, the foolish, still loving part, wants to protect him too. Protect him from the world's judgment, protect him from the shame that I know is consuming him. He went to see a psychiatrist. He continues to see one, not just for this, but for multiple other layers of anxiety and deep-seated issues. He put the infidelity down to seeking external validation, a desperate, flawed attempt to feel seen and powerful, intertwined with a deepening porn addiction that fed the need for novelty and secrecy. I want to reconcile. I truly do. I want to heal from this poison, this deep, agonizing scar on our story. It has gotten easier. The immediate, searing pain has dulled to a low, persistent throb. But it's still there. Some days are lower than others. Some days, a stray thought, a quick glance at his phone, or a moment of silence brings it all back. And I feel utterly alone in this impossible situation. I trust him now. Or at least, I trust the new him. The one who is going to therapy, the one who is finally honest, the one who is working to dismantle the architecture of lies he built. But the gaslighting and manipulation at the time, the way he made me question my sanity, the way he twisted my intuition into a moral failing, that has really impacted me. Especially because I've had partners in the past who were continuously like that. Partners who systematically dismantled my reality. But I know he's not like that at his core. He's a completely different person at this stage in our relationship compared to when we first met. Way more mature, deeply remorseful, finally transparent. I'm not sure what I'm looking for in telling this story. Maybe some guidance. Maybe just the catharsis of putting it all out there, clean and unvarnished. Sorry for the long post, but the truth is, this is only the beginning of the story, the real story, the one of what happens after forgiveness, after the confession. That's the story I'm living now. And it's a story far more complicated, dark, and uncertain than I ever could have imagined. I was naive to think the confession was the ending. It was only the prologue. The nightmare was just beginning to unfold. The truth, a bitter, jagged pill, had been swallowed, but it refused to settle. It lodged in my throat, a permanent choke point, reminding me with every breath that the air I was breathing was no longer entirely clean. Forgiveness. It was the word I had offered, the contract I had signed in the white-hot heat of his confession, the desperate clinging to the 6 years of good we had built. But forgiveness is not amnesia. It is a daily, agonizing choice to love a person who has fundamentally rewritten your shared history. The silence that settled after the shouting was the worst kind. Not the peaceful quiet of reconciliation, but the heavy, sterile silence of a hospital room after a critical surgery. We were both alive, but profoundly wounded, staring at the visible, ugly sutures across our relationship. He was trying. God, he was trying. He'd leave little notes, do the dishes without being asked, initiate conversations that were not about the wound, but about us, our future, our next trip, the ridiculous movie we saw last year. He was attempting to build a scaffolding of normalcy around the collapsing structure. But the paranoia, the one he had so effectively beaten out of me 4 years prior, the one he had gaslit me into believing was my dysfunction, it had returned, armored and merciless. It sat on my shoulder, a tiny venomous demon whispering, if he lied about boredom, if he lied about WhatsApp, if he lied for 4 years about the entire foundation of your trust, what else is a lie? The claim of no physical cheating became the new obsession, the final tenuous thread I was hanging on to. It was the only barrier between a painful betrayal and a total annihilation of my reality. He was adamant. It was only online. It was external validation. It was an addiction. It was contained. But the words external validation now sounded like a terrifying code, a sterile, clinical explanation for a gut-wrenching, intimate violation. I would watch him, sitting across the dinner table, his profile lit by the soft kitchen lamp, and try to reconcile the earnest, remorseful man I saw with the duplicitous, secret person who spent nights chasing anonymous satisfaction in the dark. This time my depression was different. It wasn't the inward-turning, self-blaming sadness of 4 years ago. It was a cold, analytical sadness, a deep intellectual weariness born of having to constantly police my own reality. I felt utterly alone, not because he was physically absent, but because he had proven himself capable of existing in a parallel universe, one where I was the main character in his domestic life, while he was the adventurous anti-hero in his secret life. The joint therapy sessions began 2 weeks after the confession. I hated them. They were necessary, I knew, a prescribed step on the road to reconciliation, but they felt like a clinical autopsy of my love life. The room was bland, the couch was scratchy, and the therapist, a calm, unnervingly neutral woman named Dr. Helen, used words like coping mechanism, attachment styles, and trauma response to dissect the raw, bleeding mess of my heart. In one session, he finally articulated the why, or his version of it. I sat there, arms crossed, watching him struggle to form the words. I felt invisible, he said, his voice thick with shame. Not by you, not by us, but just invisible in the world. And the attention, the immediate, no-strings-attached attention I got from strangers, it was like a temporary fix, a high. It made me feel potent. And the secrecy, the fact that I was pulling it off, that gave me control. Dr. Helen nodded slowly. She looked at me, her gaze sympathetic but firm. Control, she echoed, and external validation. And for you, she turned to me, the impact is compounded by the prior gaslighting. The trauma is not just the betrayal, but the 4 years of self-doubt. You trusted your intuition, and he deliberately undermined it. That's a profound violation. The word gaslighting, spoken aloud, legitimized by a professional, hit me with staggering force. It wasn't just a dramatic term. It was a clinical descriptor for the psychological abuse I'd endured. I felt a surge of cold fury, not just at the cheating, but at the deliberate cruelty of the manipulation, the calculated tears he'd used to turn me into the villain of my own suspicion. That night, after the session, I couldn't sleep. I got up, went to the kitchen, and stared out the window at the distant, glittering geometry of the city. 4 years of self-doubt. I kept running the timeline in my head, a frantic, forensic review of our past. The defensiveness, the excuses, the sheer, brazen lie of the boredom. It wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was a sustained campaign of deceit. And then, the quiet, chilling thought materialized. What if the first lie, the boredom lie 4 years ago, was about something entirely different? Something far worse than the sexting he confessed to. The affair he admitted to had, he claimed, started around that 2-year mark. But what if the initial panic, the multiple WhatsApp logins, were actually a panicked reaction to a physical affair that was ending, or one he was terrified I would discover? The subsequent 4 years of perfect partner behavior could have been a sophisticated, hyper-vigilant cover-up. The sexting he confessed to this year might just be a scaled-down, digital version of the betrayal he was really trying to hide from the past. The less damaging secret offered up to protect the truly catastrophic one. My logical mind screamed, "Stop it!" He confessed. "He's in therapy. You're spiraling." But the voice of the traumatized self-protection mechanism was louder. He lied to your face for 4 years and watched you sink into depression, knowing he was the cause. You cannot trust his version of the truth. I began to investigate, not with confrontation, but with quiet, meticulous stealth. A detective working the coldest of cases, the case of my own life. I knew his current phone was clean, his behavior now transparent, but I needed to find the digital ghosts of the past. It was a morally murky pursuit, an act that felt almost as violating as his cheating. But my need for the unvarnished, complete truth trumped all ethics. I started small, with the computer we shared 4 years ago, now relegated to the guest room closet. It was slow, dusty, and agonizing to boot up. The first few hours were a dizzying tour of deleted history, encrypted files, and the digital equivalent of dead ends. But he wasn't a computer genius. He was just a scared man trying to cover his tracks. I remembered something he'd complained about around that time. A glitch with his Google account sync. He'd signed into a secondary browser profile on the old computer and forgotten to sign out properly before deleting the main one. It was a long shot. I spent the next night hunched over the glowing screen, my heart a dull, rhythmic thud against my ribs, navigating the arcane labyrinth of his old secondary Google profile. And there, buried deep in an old, rarely used cloud backup, I found a cache of ancient fragmented chats and emails, things he clearly thought were gone forever. Most of it was exactly what he'd described: sexting, explicit photos, and the hollow, narcissistic chatter of anonymous digital affairs. But one thread was different. It wasn't explicit, it was administrative. The chat was with someone whose name was only initialized, R.A., and the tone was slightly professional, slightly familiar. It spanned only a few days, right before I checked his phone the first time. The messages weren't flirty, they were logistics. R.A. to 17 p.m. Are you sure about Tuesday? I need to know before I book the conference room. It looks discreet. His reply, 2:20 p.m. Yes, 100%. Tuesday at 4. The usual excuse is fine. Just us. R.A. 2:22 p.m. Okay, booking confirmed at the Regency. Just the coffee, remember? Coffee, conference room, Regency. The words were so clinical, so ordinary, that they screamed their own sinister abnormality. Digital sexting doesn't require a conference room or a booking at a place called Regency. It doesn't require an excuse. That kind of careful logistical language is reserved for real-world interactions, for discrete meetings that require physical privacy and a coordinated alibi. My hands were shaking again, but this time, it wasn't fear that coursed through me. It was a frigid, absolute certainty. He had lied again. The confession, the limited, digital, manageable version, was a partial truth designed to cover the deeper, physical transgression that had happened 4 years ago. The memory of him weeping, "I'm scared our relationship will be affected because you don't trust me," now played in my mind like a horrifying movie, the soundtrack to a perfectly executed psychological maneuver. The tears weren't about my lack of trust. They were about the absolute terror that I would discover the Regency meeting. I closed the laptop, my fingers leaving sweaty prints on the dusty plastic. I didn't confront him immediately. I couldn't. I needed more. The old trauma was my weapon now. He had taught me how to wait, how to smile through the suspicion, how to be the perfect, unsuspecting partner. I needed to know who R.A. was and if the Regency was a hotel. I did a quick Google search on my own, clean phone, filtering the history. The Regency! It wasn't a local coffee shop. It was an upscale boutique hotel downtown, known for its discreet business suites and short-stay conference rooms. A perfect place for a professional tryst. I had hit the first real, undeniable crack in his carefully constructed narrative. The emotional wound of the digital affair was deep, but this was the introduction of a new, horrifying element, a deliberate physical rendezvous that he had lied about for 4 years, then compounded the lie by only confessing to the lesser crime. The man I was planning to marry was not just an addict seeking validation, he was a calculated, long-term deceiver who was still rationing the truth. The next day, I started researching R.A. I couldn't find a full name, but in the same fragmented cache of old data, I found a single, brief email thread from R.A. to him, a forwarded job contact which contained a full signature block, Rebecca Ainsworth, Senior Marketing Director, a recognizable local company, Rebecca Ainsworth. The name echoed in the vast emptiness of my internal monologue. She wasn't an anonymous photo or a fleeting digital fantasy. She was a colleague or a professional acquaintance, someone he had met, someone with a real job, a real life, and a real physical reason to be in a conference room at the Regency Hotel. The weight of the new discovery was crippling. It wasn't the fleeting, impulsive error of a man struggling with addiction. It was a planned, external, and physical act of infidelity, followed by an elaborate, cruel campaign of gaslighting, all to protect his own perfect facade. He hadn't just broken my heart, he had broken my mind. I continued to maintain the facade of reconciliation. We went out for dinner, and I listened to him talk about his latest therapy breakthrough, how much he was learning about his patterns of avoidance. And I smiled. I laughed. I told him how proud I was. I was a brilliant actress, a master of deception, ironically, because of the man sitting across from me, the man who had trained me in the art of hiding a devastating secret. But inside, I was formulating a plan. The reconciliation was a lie. The forgiveness was a temporary shield. I was no longer seeking guidance or comfort. I was seeking justice, or at least the final, unadulterated truth. I needed to know everything about Rebecca Ainsworth, and I needed to know the true timeline of his deceit. The psychological thriller had just shifted gears. The victim was now the investigator. I remember staring at his face as he talked, seeing the lines of remorse and fatigue, and thinking, "You are still lying to me. You are still protecting the worst version of the truth." And the terrifying realization was that I was doing the exact same thing. I was lying about my forgiveness. I was hiding my investigation. We were two strangers trapped in a relationship, each concealing a devastating secret from the other. His, the past betrayal, and mine, the absolute cold knowledge of it. That night, lying next to him, the man who had loved me and gaslit me and confessed and lied again, I made a silent vow. I would not walk down that aisle, not until I held every single piece of the truth, raw and complete, in my hands. The fight for my sanity and my life was just beginning, and it felt like a descent into a cold, dark well. But at the bottom, I knew, was the only thing that mattered, the absolute truth. And I was willing to destroy everything, including my own heart, to find it. The next step was calling my friend, the one who had also been betrayed, not for comfort, but for technical help. She was my only ally in this quiet, desperate war. She was the one who could help me pull the thread of RA into a full-blown story. My friend Clara, the one who had navigated her own treacherous journey through infidelity and emerged stronger with a wife and 2 children, was the only person I trusted with the truth now. I called her the next day, not for a shoulder to cry on, but for the cold, hard tools of war. I needed her technical expertise. She had a background in cybersecurity forensics, a skill she'd ironically honed during her own period of agonizing doubt. I didn't lead with the whole story. I led with the need. "Clara, I need a ghost, a digital one. I need to know how to track someone who thinks they've wiped their tracks clean. Specifically, I need to know everything about a person named Rebecca Ainsworth, and I need to find the truth about 4 years ago, not just the story I was told." She didn't miss a beat. No shock, no judgment, just a steely, quiet competence that I desperately needed. "You don't need a ghost," she said, her voice low and tight. "You need a full forensic audit. And you need to be careful. If he finds out, it'll be another layer of chaos. Use an encrypted line. We're going to set up a clean machine. Over the next few days, under the guise of work and errands, I started executing Clara's plan. I bought a cheap, anonymous burner laptop, setting it up in the dusty silence of the guest room. Clara walked me through the basics, how to use reverse image searches on the fragmented photos I found, how to cross-reference the name Rebecca Ainsworth with the city's corporate database, how to search dark web archives for the specific defunct sexting apps he'd mentioned, hoping to pull data fragments he hadn't controlled. The more I searched, the more the initial narrative, the one about seeking external validation and porn addiction, shrank into a neat, easily digestible lie. The real story was a complex, interwoven tapestry of manipulation and secrecy that stretched across years. Rebecca Ainsworth. The search results were quick and horrifyingly ordinary. 30-something, impeccably styled senior marketing director at a major firm, a picture of professional success, someone who looked like she belonged in a boardroom at the Regency, discussing quarterly profits, not a furtive tryst. The sheer normalcy of her life made the betrayal feel heavier, more real, less like an anonymous, one-off mistake. She wasn't an escape. She was a choice. I found old photos of them, not together, but at the same company networking events, photos tagged years ago on LinkedIn. They had a history, a professional proximity that made the logistics of the Regency meeting chillingly easy to execute. It wasn't a sudden, reckless lapse. It was an affair born of opportunity and sustained by planning. The most disturbing discovery, however, came from the forgotten secondary Google account. I found a series of financial records, small recurring payments made to a private, nondescript bank account labeled only consulting fee. They started exactly 4 years ago, right when our sex life had reduced significantly and my paranoia was spiking. They continued intermittently for nearly a year, then stopped abruptly around the time he started his perfect partner performance. Consulting fee. The total amount was negligible to our overall income, but the fact that he had created a separate, obfuscated payment stream suggested more than just a quick affair. It hinted at a sustained effort, perhaps even a financial entanglement, covering travel, gifts, or even a payoff for discretion. The sheer premeditation of the financial deception was a cold, hard slap across the face of my supposed forgiveness. I knew I needed to see him unravel completely, to force him to confess the physical cheating, the gaslighting, the financial deception, all of it. I couldn't live with the partial truth anymore. It was worse than knowing nothing. I decided to stage the confrontation, not in the heat of an argument, but deliberately, calmly, using the truth as a surgeon uses a scalpel. I prepared my evidence, a folder of screenshots, the Regency receipt, the consulting fee records. I printed nothing. Everything stayed digital, password protected, on the burner laptop. The day I chose was a Friday. He came home late, tired but happy, after his session with Dr. Helen, talking about how he was making progress and learning to be vulnerable. I was sitting on the couch in the living room, the coffee table cleared. He didn't sense the shift in the atmosphere until I spoke. "We need to cancel the wedding planner," I said, my voice flat, devoid of warmth. He stopped, mid-sentence, a hopeful smile freezing on his face. "What are you talking about? Why?" Because I continued, looking directly into his eyes. "I can't marry a man who is still lying to me." He immediately went defensive, the familiar wall slamming up. "I told you everything. What is this? Are you overthinking again?" The sheer audacity of him using those exact manipulative words. "Are you overthinking again?" After everything we'd been through, after his confession of the gaslighting, snapped something fragile inside me. "No," I said, "I'm not overthinking. I'm thinking exactly the right amount. Do you remember Rebecca Ainsworth?" The color drained instantly from his face. It wasn't a slow realization. It was a physical shock, as if I'd hit him. He didn't ask, "Who is that?" He just froze, his breath catching in his throat. He knew exactly who she was. We both sat there in a protracted, agonizing silence, the ticking of the clock suddenly deafening. He didn't cry this time. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. I waited. I didn't press. I let the name hang in the air, thick and poisoned, forcing him to face the total failure of his selective truth. "I know about the Regency," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. "The conference room, the coffee excuse, and I know about the consulting fee payments. It wasn't just online. It wasn't just the boredom you claimed 4 years ago. It was physical. You met her. You lied about it then, and you lied about it again when you confessed this year." He finally looked up, his eyes glassy with unshed tears, but this time, the tears weren't for me. They were for the collapse of his final defense. It was only twice, he choked out, the words catching on a sob that was now genuine, messy, and desperate. It was before the digital stuff. It was an attempt to feel something. It was horrible. I hated myself. That's why I stopped the physical and only went digital. Only twice. The rationalization was so pathetic, so inadequate, that it almost made me laugh. As if 2 physical meetings were somehow forgivable because the subsequent digital betrayal was more frequent. But why, I whispered, the exhaustion of 4 years of fighting for the truth weighing on me? Why didn't you tell me this year? Why admit to the sexting, but keep the secret? He buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled by the shame. I couldn't tell you the whole truth. I was terrified. The digital thing, it felt manageable. It felt like something you could forgive. If I admitted the physical part, I knew you would leave. I knew it would destroy us completely. I had to protect the chance we had. I had to protect my chance at forgiveness. The raw, narcissistic truth. He hadn't been protecting me from the pain. He had been protecting himself from the consequences. His confession of the sexting wasn't an act of radical honesty. It was a calculated risk, a surgical incision of the least damaging truth to save the whole patient. The gaslighting, the 4 years of blissful denial, it was all a defense mechanism, a cover-up for the 2 times he met Rebecca Ainsworth at the Regency. I stood up. I couldn't sit in that room anymore. The air was too thick with lies. "I don't know who you are," I said, walking towards the bedroom. "The person I love is the one who made memories, had laughs, and showed respect. The person I'm looking at is a calculated liar who watched me think I was going crazy just to save himself." He scrambled to his feet, reaching for my arm. "Don't go, please! I'm finally telling you everything. It's out now." We can work through this. The therapy. I pulled my arm away. The therapy, the remorse, the effort he'd been making, it was all now tainted by the knowledge that he had been in therapy for the wrong reason. He was working on his addiction while still concealing the core, physical lie. The only thing that's out, I said, is the absolute fact that you are fundamentally untrustworthy. You had 4 years to tell me, then you had 6 months after the first confession. You were still rationing the truth. I walked into the bedroom and started pulling a small suitcase from the closet. I wasn't leaving him. I was leaving the apartment. I needed space to think, to separate his genuine remorse for the digital affair and his general issues from his calculated deception, the physical affair and the cover-up. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. "I'm going to Clara's," I said, packing only essentials. "And I'm going to finally start believing my gut feeling instead of trying to save yours. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not being gaslit." The door clicked shut behind me, the sound final, absolute. The quiet chaos of my own making was better than the suffocating lie of his manufactured reconciliation. I drove through the night, the city lights blurring into streaks of abstract color, finally terrifyingly free of the illusion. The story had just moved from a psychological drama to a full-blown existential crisis, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was not coming back until the truth was fully excavated. The next move was mine. Clara's spare room wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a sanctuary of cold, clinical clarity. She didn't press for details, knowing the agony of having to recount the betrayal. Instead, she offered practical, immediate support. A sturdy, silent witness to the demolition of my life. She helped me create a timeline, a visual, objective chart of his deception, the initial emotional withdrawal and defensiveness at the 2-year mark, the gaslighting and the tears that made me feel like the problem, the 4 years of perfect performative stability, the confession of digital cheating at the 6-year mark, and now, the final, wrenching admission of the physical affair with Rebecca Ainsworth. Seeing it mapped out, black on white, was brutal. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, a meticulous architecture of lies, built layer by layer. I spent the first few days simply trying to reconnect with the person I was before the gaslighting, the one who trusted her gut, the one who knew deep down that when something felt fishy, it usually was. I remembered the crushing depression, the self-doubt, the endless loop of thinking something was wrong with me. The bitterness wasn't just about the cheating, it was about the psychological warfare he had waged on my sanity to protect himself. He wasn't just a liar, he was a manipulator. Clara, who had only been told the initial story, the digital one, the one where he sought external validation and had a porn addiction, listened to the full, devastating update about Rebecca and the Regency. She didn't flinch. "You did the right thing. Checking out," she said, handing me a mug of tea. "You can't build a marriage on a half-truth, especially one where he was still deciding how much to tell you. He was bargaining with your forgiveness." Her calm analysis was exactly what I needed. She helped me reframe the past 4 years, not as a period of perfect love, but as a period of my own emotional recovery from a trauma he had inflicted and then masterfully disguised. The good memories, the trips, the laughs, the feeling of being loved, they were real, but they were also the scenery in a carefully constructed stage play. But the question remained, what now? I still had the immense, confusing weight of 6 years of genuine love. He wasn't a villain at his core. He was deeply flawed, yes, but he was also the man who had matured over time, who was fundamentally different from the person who first committed the act. He was in therapy, working on his issues. The part of me that wanted to reconcile, the part that wanted to heal and move forward, was still desperately alive. It was easier some days than others, but the wound was always there. Clara, who was happily married after her own infidelity trauma, offered a perspective I hadn't considered. The betrayal is the physical act and the digital act. That's a wound. But the gaslighting, that's the poison. That's the part that changes your structure. You can't move forward until he understands, truly understands, the impact of the manipulation on your sanity. And he needs to demonstrate that he can now handle the full truth, even when it's painful for him. She suggested a final absolute test, A face-to-face meeting, but not at the apartment, not in the confines of our shared history. A neutral ground, perhaps even in Dr. Helen's office, to force complete accountability. I agreed. I called him later that week. His voice was raw, desperate, filled with the real fear that I was gone for good. He asked where I was. I told him I was safe, but not coming back yet. I want to talk, I said, but only in front of Dr. Helen. I need to know that what I hear is the truth, not another strategic confession. He agreed instantly. The desperation in his voice confirmed everything I needed to know about his true terror. The loss of me, not the fear of his own moral failure. The session was scheduled for the following afternoon. I walked into the bland, scratchy room, feeling like an observer in my own tragedy. He was already there, looking hollowed out, wearing the weight of his guilt like a heavy cloak. Dr. Helen, the calm, neutral arbiter, sat between us. I started, not with an accusation, but with a statement of fact. The lie about the physical affair, that was the last straw, I stated. But the real issue is the gaslighting. For 4 years, you let me sink into depression, let me question my sanity, let me believe there was something fundamentally wrong with me because of your secret. I need to understand that. Not the why of the cheating, but the why of the cruelty. He took a shaking breath. The usual defensive wall didn't go up. This was a man stripped bare, facing the totality of his actions. It wasn't cruelty, he whispered, though I knew it was. It was fear, pure, selfish fear. I was so terrified of losing you after the physical thing with Rebecca. I thought if I could just act like the perfect partner, if I could make you believe we were great, that the silence would cover the lie. When you first asked about the WhatsApp, and I saw the opportunity to deflect with my tears, it worked so well. It worked to save me, and then I couldn't stop. Every time you brought it up, every time you questioned yourself, I just reinforced the narrative that you were the one who was paranoid. It became reflexive. It was easier to make you doubt yourself than to face the absolute destruction of my own making. I looked at him, truly seeing the brokenness this time, and the realization hit me. His emotional trauma, the need for external validation, the addiction, it was his engine, but the gaslighting was his armor. He truly hadn't been acting out of malice, but out of a profound, narcissistic self-preservation. It was still devastating, but it finally made a sick, coherent sense. Dr. Helen intervened softly. "This is the point of reckoning," she said. "You both have to acknowledge that the foundation of your relationship was based on a lie and manipulation for 4 years. The only way forward, together or apart, is for you to truly believe that he will never, under any circumstances, allow you to question your sanity again. This requires radical transparency, not just about your phone, but about your internal world." I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, but it was cold, cautious hope. "If we move forward," I said, my voice heavy with the gravity of the potential contract, "there are non-negotiables. You terminate all ties, digital and physical, with anyone from your past. Complete open access, financial and digital, for a period of 5 years. Weekly individual therapy and couples therapy for at least the next year. And finally, you have to accept that I will have bad days, days where the gaslighting comes back and I won't trust you. On those days, you don't defend, you don't deflect. You just hold space for my pain and affirm my reality." He nodded, tears finally tracking down his face. Not the manipulative kind, but the tears of a man facing a monumental penance. "I accept," he said. "Every condition. I have ruined the trust. It's my job to earn it back." I walked out of that session feeling utterly exhausted, but strangely, profoundly lighter. I hadn't given him a final answer, but I had laid down the only terms under which reconciliation was even possible. The emotional drainage of the last 6 years, the loneliness of facing this alone, had been addressed. I was no longer protecting him or the illusion of the relationship. I was fighting for my own sanity. The next phase was not about forgiveness. It was about the brutal, tedious work of rebuilding the foundation. It was about seeing if a relationship built on a lie could ever be rebuilt on the hard, unyielding bedrock of total truth. I still wasn't ready to go home, but I was ready to start the long, impossible climb toward healing. The story wasn't ending in a grand, dramatic flourish. It was beginning again, in the quiet, painstaking silence of radical honesty. The real work, The work of two broken people trying to put their pieces back together was about to start. The reconciliation didn't start with a kiss or a shared bottle of wine. It started with a spreadsheet. It was Claire's idea, another cold, necessary tool for rebuilding trust. We needed to track the quantifiable efforts, the tangible proof that his commitment to honesty was more than just tearful words in a therapist's office. The sheet was simple, columns for his weekly individual therapy session notes. Not the content, but the homework, the insights he was willing to share. Columns for financial transparency, daily automatic syncs of all accounts to a joint app I could monitor, and columns for digital accountability, his phone, his old email accounts, his social media history, all now open and accessible. The first few months were a sterile, exhausting grind. We moved back in together, but it felt like roommates sharing a lease after a near-fatal accident. Every quiet evening, every shared meal was underscored by the unspoken contract of my conditions. He was meticulously compliant. He never once questioned the need for access. He logged his daily sobriety from the porn addiction. He forwarded his meeting schedules. He proactively talked about his struggles with self-pity and his fear of my next bad day. His openness was a jarring contrast to the years of calculated secrecy. He was a different person, more mature, more present, finally wrestling with the core insecurities that had driven his deceit. But compliance is not trust. Trust is a feeling that has to grow back in the dark, and my internal landscape was still a battlefield. My bad days were frequent and ferocious. They often struck without warning, a sudden sharp memory of the gaslighting, a moment of silence where the whisper of, "What if he's still lying?" would start. One evening, we were getting ready for a mutual friend's wedding, another one of the many we had attended that year. I was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress, when the memory of his manipulative tears 4 years ago slammed into me. I remembered him weeping, scared that our relationship would be affected because I didn't trust him. I remembered feeling horrible, thinking I was the problem. I turned from the mirror, my heart pounding, the metallic scent of fear back. "You were still sleeping with me, weren't you?" I asked, my voice flat, dead. During those months, when I was so depressed, when I thought something was wrong with me, you were still touching me, still saying I love you, knowing you were meeting Rebecca and talking to strangers online. He stopped fastening his cufflinks. The question wasn't about the fact of the betrayal. It was about the sickening, close proximity horror of it. "Yes," he whispered, his eyes closing briefly in pain. "And it was the worst part of it all. I felt like a monster. And you asked if I was overthinking again. You asked that while you were lying to my face, watching me fall apart." He didn't defend himself. He didn't deflect. He just walked toward me, but stopped short of touching me, respecting the boundary of my fragility. "You are right," he said, his voice thick with genuine shame. "It was cruelty. I have to live with that. You don't have to live with the self-doubt anymore, but I have to live with what I did to your mind. I am so sorry. I am truly sorry for the cruelty of the gaslighting, that moment of unreserved admission, the recognition of the gaslighting as an independent act of psychological cruelty, was more healing than any spreadsheet entry or therapy session. It affirmed my reality, validated my pain, and finally, decisively shifted the focus from his fear to my trauma. We didn't attend the wedding that night. We stayed home. We sat on the couch, side by side, not touching, and I allowed myself to fully grieve the relationship that had died, the one built on the illusion of perfect trust. The reconciliation, I realized, was not about saving the old relationship. It was about creating a new, radically honest one out of the ashes of the old. I knew deep down that the potential for healing was there. I trusted the new version of him, the one who was working to dismantle his own destructive patterns. But the impact of the manipulation, the gaslighting, that was the scar that would remain. My friend Clara, my only support in this private war, reminded me that healing is not linear. It gets easier, but some days are still lower than others. I still felt utterly alone in the struggle to process the trauma, even with his compliance. But I was no longer protecting him. I was prioritizing my own peace. We didn't talk about the marriage plans again for a long time. The rings, the venues, the future. It all felt secondary to the painful daily excavation of the truth. But one quiet Sunday morning, nearly a year after the final confession, he brought me a small, sealed box. It wasn't a ring box. It was a box containing a new journal and a small, worn stone. a piece of dark obsidian. "I want you to have this," he said, his voice soft. "The journal is for the bad days. Write everything down. Your paranoia, your suspicion, your pain. Don't filter it for me. And the stone, it's a reminder. I am the rock now, not the lie. If you feel the need to spiral, hold the stone and know that your reality is affirmed. I am here, present, and transparent." It was the most profound gesture of accountability he could have offered. Not flowers, not jewelry, but a physical anchor to my sanity, a testament to the years he had spent undermining it. I still don't know what the ultimate outcome will be. We are still in the trenches, fighting for every inch of recovered trust. We are navigating the truth, the whole, unvarnished, ugly truth. But the overwhelming loneliness that once consumed me has receded, replaced by the quiet, fierce determination of two people who chose to look directly at the wreckage and start building something real, even if it is scarred. The story is no longer a psychological thriller of deceit. It is a slow, agonizingly beautiful drama of reconstruction.